Hello and welcome to the Sleep Matters podcast from Dreams. Everything you need to know about how to get a great night's sleep and why it matters so much. I'm Dr. Pixie McKenna, and in this episode we're chatting about the importance of sleep when travelling and how to get through those long-haul flights and jet lag when you're abroad. So what a better person to have on board than Simon Calder. Simon is a travel journalist and broadcaster. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I did wake up quite refreshed for today, unlike exactly a year ago when, can you believe, I did back-to-back the world's longest flight from the UK, non-stop out to Perth and then back again. Crikey. Yes, not a great journey, and so very, very fresh in my mind.
Good. Well, I'm glad we didn't have you in a year ago. You would have been asleep at the table. And we also have Dr. Richard Dawood. And Richard has practiced as a travel health expert for the last 35 years. So
yes, gosh,
Richard
that sounds a long time.
Can I just say, I hope you don't mind me, I was describing Richard to a colleague and I just said, he's Mr. Travel Medicine. So
Mr. Travel Medicine.
Yes.
Okay.
You're very kind. You're very kind.
So I suppose let's kick it off with you, Richard. What's the relationship between travel and sleep?
Okay, there are two things that we need to distinguish from each other. So the first is the journey itself and the fatigue that goes with it, whether or not you miss any sleep along the way. So a good example of that might be flying from the UK to South Africa. That might be an overnight flight. You might arrive in not very good shape the next morning, but you won't be in a new time zone. So how you feel at the end of that flight really depends on what you do during the journey. Are you going to stay up all night? Are you going to enjoy the first class food and drinks and
assuming
so
we're in first class? What about the rest of us?
Or indeed, are you cramped into a very narrow economy seat between two large people, unable to sleep, children crying in the background, and so on? You might arrive in bad shape, you might arrive tired, dehydrated and uncomfortable, but that is not jet lag. So we need to distinguish between that and an entirely different phenomenon, which is when you start your journey in one time zone and a small number of hours later, 5 or 6 hours or 8 hours later, you find yourself with a time difference that either lengthens your day or compresses your day faster than the body is capable of adapting to. So we find it a little bit easier to lengthen our day. So if you travel from the UK to the US, let's say a 5-hour time difference for most of the year between London and the east coast of the United States, well, we have a natural daily rhythm which is about 25 hours rather than 24 hours long. So that's why most of us find it a little bit of a struggle to wake up in the morning. If you regularly wake up at 6 or 7 in the morning, it's a bit of a battle because your body really would like that extra hour in bed.
That's good to know. There's a real reason for it, other than being lazy.
So some people are early morning people and they don't find that so tricky. I imagine you must be one of those, Simon.
Well, I do get up quite a lot, but that's normally, and you will be fully aware of this, Pixie, the curse, or is it a joy of the really cheap, really early flights? I mean, it used to be in the olden days, now I'm going back quarter of a century here, when none of us could afford to fly anywhere. If you wanted to go back and forth to Ireland, you were probably on the bus. But now, if you're prepared to get up and be on the 6 o'clock flight, then of course you can get a bargain. But the trouble is, working backwards, 6 o'clock flight, so you've got to be at the airport 4:30 or 5. You've got to get there, so you're getting up 2 o'clock in the morning. Can I just ask though, Richard, why, since humans have been around for a couple of million years perhaps, why are we still out of sync with the cosmos?
Yeah,
that seems weird.
Sort it out, Richard.
Yeah.
I'm afraid it's just the way we've been built. There are lots of other things we could definitely redesign into the body. We could do without prostates and a few other organs that annoy us and aren't quite as well designed as perhaps they ought to have been. But that's the way it is. And if you shut people up in a cave, and people do experiments like this, where you remove all outside stimuli and let the body adapt its own natural rhythm, that's what you find, that for the majority of people it's on a 25-hour cycle rather than an exact 24-hour cycle.
And that's how Richard spends his holidays, in a cave.
So for that reason, doing the same journey but in different directions gives you a rather different experience. So for example, you can arrive in New York and adapt to an extended day quite easily, so you're effectively staying up later. But if you try and do the same journey in reverse, when it's bedtime, you don't really want to go to sleep. It's actually quite hard to compress the day and make yourself fall asleep when you're not tired.
Just on that subject of going across, say, to New York from London, I was speaking to a grandmother who makes that journey many times each year to see her grandchildren, and she says that the daytime flights coming back from the US are known as grandmother and chairman's flights.
Oh, really?
Because they are the only people who can afford the time to take the take a daytime flight, because of course, if you're a high pressure businesswoman or man, then you are going to want a whole day in Manhattan, and then you fly back overnight. But if you can spare the time and be kind to yourself, would that work?
Yeah, no, that absolutely works. So obviously the opposite of that is the red eye, the overnight flight, where there just isn't enough time to get enough sleep. So if you do it overnight, what is billed as an overnight flight is actually only about maybe 5 or 6 hours long, and if you deduct the preliminaries of getting buckled in and getting to an altitude where you can begin to recline your seat, and at the other end the breakfast option where they wake you up 2 hours before you need to land, that's not very much time to sleep. If you could do it during the day, you actually really minimize sleep loss. So what you're left with is still disorientation at the other end, the jet lag, but you've removed the fatigue element from it.
So those effects, I suppose, that you get, the jet lag effects, what's the science behind those, Richard?
So with jet lag, what happens is that your speed of travel outstrips the body's ability to adapt. The body adapts to new time zones at the rate of approximately 1 hour per day of time difference. So bearing in mind, as I said, if you're travelling east, that's easier, so it's a bit shorter, so perhaps 4 days rather than 5 to adapt to a London-New York journey, but certainly 5 hours to adapt back again. And the trouble is that the things that we come across in our daily lives differ in their ability to force us into a new time zone. So things like meal times or looking at your watch, these are signals to the body of what the clock time is. Your body doesn't respond quickly, so simply just adjusting your watch doesn't actually make you feel that it's midday. Simply having a meal set before you doesn't make you feel that it's dinner time or breakfast time. Those cues and clues that are in the environment take much longer to have an effect. So the fastest that people can adapt naturally without intervening, and I'll come on to that, but the fastest is about 1 hour per day. So if you're traveling on an 8-hour time difference, it typically will take you 8 days before everything is back to normal and you're operating at a normal local time. And during the interim, you will feel disorientated, you'll feel hungry when you shouldn't be, sleepy when you shouldn't be, wide awake when you shouldn't be, going to the toilet, all of the things that naturally happen in our bodies are really out of kilter, and that's hence the expression jet lag. It's the slowing period.
Down, yeah.
And just to help people visualise, lots of places 8 hours away. So down the western coast of the US, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Vancouver in Canada, of course, and then in the opposite direction, well, pretty much everywhere. Tokyo, Hong Kong, Singapore, all 8 hours away. And all, of course, very accessible on non-stop
And if you're
flights.
going on a 2-week trip, you've got 8 days of jet lag one way, maybe 4 days feeling just about right, and then 8 days to adapt on your return.
That's why everybody fights on holiday, I suppose. But if you think about that, all the people that are up the top of the plane who are high-flying executives that are on the red eye, etc., the quality of the work that they must be doing when they get to their destination must be rubbish.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So this is again, this is the distinction between the fatigue and the effect of the journey itself. So being at the front of the plane definitely minimises that, although that could be counterbalanced by some of the indulgences that they might be offered.
What are you trying to tell us here, Richard? No alcohol? Is that the short answer?
So if you want to arrive in better shape, you're definitely better off avoiding alcohol and avoiding caffeine. So things that alter your sleep and wakefulness and interfere with those feelings, those are best avoided if you want to arrive in better shape.
Can I ask you a question? Because although I'm a doctor, I don't know the answer to this, and I've been asked this loads of times before. Is one drink on the ground, one drink in the air the equivalent to 3 drinks on the ground?
Well, it's
or is that just nonsense?
It's probably not quite that much, but
Right.
definitely alcohol has a more powerful effect. There are lots, so it's the combined effect with the reduced oxygen pressure in the air that is the thing. So that all of those things conspire to making you feel in less good shape. And there are other things that, so the hangover effect that you might get from alcohol is enhanced in the air. You're more dehydrated. It's not so much that the cabin air is drying you out, it's the fact that your fluid intake during a flight is usually much less. You don't drink or eat in the same way as you do on the ground, and the cabin air pressure forces fluid from your circulation into the soft tissues, so you feel a little bit headachy and dehydrated anyway. So once you start adding all of those confounding factors, you get with something that's a little bit confusing to the body. So yeah, if your goal is to arrive in good shape, then you would avoid some of those factors. But the thing that is no different whether you're in the front of the plane or the back of the plane is the jet lag effect itself, the displacement. Now, there are some things that you can do to overcome that, but I'll come on to those. But essentially, that is class independent. So it's a great jet lag is a leveler.
It's like mosquitoes when you get there.
And if I may just, if you're in very high latitudes or very low latitudes, close to a pole, then you are going to be ticking off those time zones at a terrifying rate. So, for example, you can get out to Alaska in about 12 hours, and the time difference is 10 hours. Similarly, Southern Hemisphere, anybody who's ever done the South America, Buenos Aires or Santiago to Sydney, that's utterly disorientating because you've got a relatively quick travel time and a vast number of time zones that you're passing through.
So you want to take a really long holiday when you get there. You don't want to go for a quick trip. Or controversially, I'll just put this out there, maybe you just say, look, being a traveller is a bit like being a shift worker. You have to cope with these things, and maybe I'll actually spend my first few days in New York getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning local time and having a really interesting time exploring the kind of markets which are starting up, having a look at the museums as soon as they open, and then having some lunch and go to bed.
So that's a very valid point, Simon. So one option is actually not to try to adapt at all, and that's especially sensible if you are going for a very short time. So if it will take you 8 hours to adapt, but you're only going for 4 days, it's pointless. There's no value at all in trying to adapt. So what you should then really be doing is keeping your body on home time rather than local time. to the extent that you can, because you'll then be in a much better position to adapt back again. And it also brings up the point that you're making about what people get up to on arrival and their performance. So their performance is always going to be better when you're suffering from jet lag. Your performance is always going to be better when you're conducting your meetings or your events at a time when you would be normally awake at home. And that's, so if you are advising somebody who's traveling to negotiate a trade deal perhaps, or conduct some kind of high-level business activity, you really want, if you want to steal a march on the competition, you really want to make sure that you pick a time for the meeting, not when it would be the middle of the night at home,
Fantastic.
but when you're actually would normally be up and alert. And it doesn't really matter whether you've had sleep or not. It's until your body has adapted properly, you're better off just running things around your body clock rather than around the local time.
Look, let's talk about insects and their capacity to keep you awake. And there's nothing worse than not being able to sleep because you've either been bitten or you're fearful of being bitten. And this kind of extends more widely across the whole sphere of travel medicine. If my tips, I sometimes talk to schools and colleges about staying safe, and my tips are be very careful on the roads. Don't text while you're crossing the road, and if you can find an alternative to road travel, please do. Know how a riptide works and how to get out of one, and just avoid mosquitoes if you're going anywhere tropical, because not only are they maddening and they will destroy your sleep, and that
there's the sound. It's the sound more than anything.
So miserable.
Really.
So I just and Richard taught me this about 20 years ago. Just be absolutely obsessive about mosquitoes. And that's the main problem. But otherwise you just maybe it's a sort of whole backpackery thing. You just make do with whatever circumstances.
Whatever's there, and don't bring special pillows or anything like that. Do you? Do you have anything?
No. But that's either disorganisation or just because generally things work out all right. Yes.
Yeah.
I have to own up to my special travel pillow.
Yeah?
Yeah, memory foam.
What's so special about it?
It's memory foam, and and it either helps me when I'm in that really uncomfortable airline seat, or it helps me get off to sleep when I'm sure it's just conditioning.
Yes.
So, but that's my lucky
it's
charm.
Your lucky
really.
charm, your lucky pillow. What about technology and using? Is that going to have a bad impact in terms of our jet lag? So say we're flying over to New York and our
Screen
use of
time.
tech. Yeah.
For exactly the reason I explained about light exposure, that is why using a screen when you should be sleeping is so disruptive. You're giving yourself a blast of potentially bright white light at exactly the time when your body is most sensitive to it. So just as exposing yourself to light earlier or later in the day has a gentle effect, the most vigorous effect that you can get is actually to be exposed to light during the middle of the night, because there's a crossover between when it brings your light cycle forwards or shifts it further backwards, and so you can actually interfere with your adaptation, and there's a name for this. People call it light hygiene.
Light hygiene. Oh, I like that.
So you need to be conscious of light hygiene, and it can be especially disruptive when you're traveling to get that bright light exposure at the wrong time.
Right, but this goes completely against what the airlines do and say. They are constantly trying to upgrade their screens, their in-flight entertainment, and the boss of a very large and very successful airline basically just says, right, in economy, just give people lots and lots of films, give them the occasional meal, and they'll cope with any length of journey. But you're saying that's the worst thing to do.
Different goals, so it depends if your goal is rapid adaptation to a new time zone, or an ability to while away the boredom and be insensitive to the discomfort. So that's the
Right.
issue. And each thing has its place. I mean, you may not want to adapt very quickly to a new time zone if it's only a short trip. So so I think it just helps to understand how these things work and what the trade-off is and what place that they will have in the scheme of things.
So what would your top tips? So to someone who's going to go on a long haul flight, what are your top tips?
First of all, decide if you've got to go on a long haul flight or whether you can actually split the journey into separate sections. I mean, the most extreme flight you can have is one from the UK to Australia, or more particularly New Zealand. And yes, you can get on a plane in Heathrow and go to Los Angeles and go on to New Zealand. But what a complete waste. You're flying over some fantastic places. And so you could go back to the olden days when planes had to stop to refuel. So you could go to Athens and then to somewhere in the Gulf and then over to India and a couple of stops in India and then maybe Southeast Asia and make a real journey of it. But given that that's probably going to be more expensive and certainly it's going to devour the most precious quantity of all, which is time, if you're not going to do that, then my view, possibly counter to medical world, is simply, if you're tired, go to sleep. If you're not, don't try and force yourself.
I like it. Pretty simple. What about you,
Well,
Richard?
I like that advice very much. I think the best thing is to do in terms of arriving in better shape is to plan your journey so that you reduce sleep loss. I think trying to get a full night's sleep on a short overnight flight is not possible, and you will arrive in less good shape. So try and protect yourself from those kinds of phenomena. Try and arrive in good shape to the extent that you can. Be aware of your limitations during the period that you're adapting, and try and time all of the most critical events, the most enjoyable things, the most important meetings, to a point where your body clock is on your side.
And if I may also, other forms of transport are available. And if you take Moscow to Vladivostok, you can fly it in about 10 hours. It cuts across a ridiculous number of time zones because you're going across northern Siberia quite a lot. But there is a very good train, the Trans-Siberian. It's going to take you a week, but it is also going to give you a window on this amazing world. And it also, if I may, if you've got a time difference of about 7 or 8 hours, if you're on a train for a week, you're not even going to notice, are you, Doctor?
Fantastic. I'm up for it, Simon. Let's go.
You've obviously been pretty much everywhere across the globe, I'd say. Where's the weirdest place you've got your head down?
Oh, crikey. Well, there's so many that
you're allowed to say.
I think in the deserts of Jordan, sleeping out under the stars. You can do that also in parts of Namibia if you're careful about the local wildlife. And that, I don't know whether that's taking us back to prehistoric age when lots of people did that, or whether they were actually in Richard's cave. After that, I suppose the worst sleep I've ever got has generally been at high altitudes, trying to climb quite high mountains, where I don't know if it's a combination of worry because you might fall off next day, whether it's thin air, whether it's the fact that you'll be getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and stumbling up this mountain to try to get to the top for sunrise. So I can never sleep then. But honestly, I guess I think the most exciting thing about travel that people don't really count is the fantastic dreams you have when you are in somewhere new and different. And that's a really important direction to me.
So that's the plus side of jet lag,
Yeah.
I guess. What about you? Where's your weirdest?
Well, my weirdest, oh, goodness. As a student, I hitched around South America, and we were lucky enough to be locked in Machu Picchu overnight. And my travel companion had the idea that we could build ourselves some kind of bivouac under ferns and bracken and survive the night that way. We had absolutely no gear with us at all. It was a complete disaster. We were frozen to death, but it was totally fabulous.
Wonderful.
And yours?
Similarly, as a student, I hitched around Italy and ended up in Elba.
Ooh.
And didn't want to pay for any accommodation. I was with some friends of mine and we slept on the beach, and I woke up with a dog peeing on my leg.
Fantastic. It's
So that
the
was the
glamour
end of that.
travel, isn't it? Yes.
Oh dear. Well, look, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Simon and Richard.
Thank
and I hope
you.
you have further great holidays and great sleeps in exotic places. Been great. Lots of tips there for everybody. Thank you for watching the Sleep Matters podcast from Dreams. If you enjoyed it, then please press the like button below. And if you want to see more, then you can subscribe to this series.